morning, lovelies! Welcome to part 3 of my 4-part video series on how to write evil empires. Last time we talked about how empires get started, and today we're going to talk about how they maintain themselves and stay in power. A quick note before we begin, my ultimate world building checklist is still available on my website for 99 cents, and patrons on my Patreon page get them for free. Both of those are linked in the description, and if you want more personalized one-on-one help, I do offer writing coaching services. It's on my website, also linked. So the source for the information from this video largely comes from Oren Litwin's Beyond Kings and Princesses, Governments for World Builders, which is a must-have for any and all world builders and sci-fi fantasy writers. I cannot recommend this book enough. It is fantastic. It's little, it's very easy to read. He breaks everything down, super digestible, and it's really cool. You're gonna get 1,000 ideas just from like the first few chapters. One of his main arguments is that governments, including empires, stand on what he calls the tripod of power: legitimacy, military, and administration. Legitimacy is basically the reason that the leader gives to the people as to why they are in charge, why everyone should follow them, and this varies from culture to culture. In monarchies, the legitimate reason is that they are the blood heir to the throne. In democracies, it's because they won the election. In dictatorships, it's because no one else is alive to question them. Now, you can rule without legitimacy, especially if you have a powerful enough military, which we will talk about next. History has proven that time and time again. This is especially true for evil empires, who may be ruled by a usurper who ousted the rightful heir a few years or even a few generations ago. In that case, the solution to defeating the evil empire is very easy for the heroes. You get the rightful heir back on the throne, and assuming that they're a generally heroic person, everything will be fine. The rightful heir will have legitimacy on their side, of course, but without a military or other powerful allies, they're going to have a hard time actually getting and keeping that throne. But before we go into militaries, I wanted to take a moment to look at the different evil emperor archetypes. Because you can't have an evil empire without an evil emperor. They're the main antagonist, the final boss. You can't forget about this bastard. Here's the funny thing with fantasy and sci-fi. Well, any other type of ruler is just as likely to be good as they are to be evil in fiction. You know, kings, queens, presidents, they all span across the entire moral spectrum. Fictional emperors are almost always evil, just like fictional empires are almost always evil. They're often some flavor of Dark Lord, and that is just an overall evil entity with control over a lot of minions. But evil emperors specifically come in a lot of different subtypes, which I have taken from TV tropes for the sake of time. A quick note, you can mix and match some of these. Archetypes are not federal law, and more often than not, several characters overlap with specific tropes. So don't think when you're creating an evil emperor that you have to pick only one. No, go whatever best fits your character and story. First up, we have the evil overlord, your standard big bad guy. This jerk got and or keeps their position through brute force, either muscle or sorcery, and bullies their subjects and minions so you know that they're bad. They're not a subtle lot, these evil overlords. They're basically the imperial version of the playground bully, but with an army. Expect them to kill at least one of their followers earlier in the story to make a point. More subtle types tend to be the Shadow Emperor. This one rules from behind the scenes, masking everything they do behind conspiracies and third parties. We might not even know that this emperor is the main villain of your story until the halfway point, if not several books into the series. They are never going to be directly involved with the hero if they can help it. Not only are there several layers of bureaucracy between them and the common citizen, it's just not their style. They want to remain a mysterious, untouchable figure for as long as possible. In fantasy stories especially, they may have hidden or secret powers that they can use for spying, mind control, or self-defense. Sometimes they're more absorbed with studying magic than actually running the empire, only reluctantly leaving their work to deal with politics. 50-50 odds that they're trying to be immortal. President Charisma is an evil emperor, or just an evil leader overall, with damn good PR. They're an expert at putting on an act for the cameras, making the public think that they're a good person, fighting against corruption, when behind closed doors, they are the cause of that corruption. They are incredibly manipulative. Sometimes even their closest minions or even their family don't even know who they really are. Expect the heroes to have to get them to do an engineered public confession. That's that thing where they accidentally blurt out all the crappy stuff they did in public. That's gonna be the only real way to take this person down. But that is going to be much harder because, again, this guy has public opinion on their side. So there's not likely to be a built-in group of rebels for our heroes to attach themselves to as there might be for the other two. And your average citizen is far more likely to believe the Emperor's story over pretty much anyone else's, or to at least give them the benefit of the doubt. Finally, it is possible to have a benevolent emperor in an evil empire. This is the head honcho who actually sides with the heroes. The Earth King from Avatar: The Last Airbender is a prime example, despite technically being a king instead of an emperor. But look at how much land he controls. And then also King Boomy is in the Earth Kingdom, which is supposed to be ruled entirely by the Earth King, which would make Boomy a vassal to the Earth King, which makes the Earth King an emperor. What even is this government system? Anyway, King Kui is in charge, but he had no idea about the corruption going on in his own city, or even that there was a war happening at all. A common flaw among benevolent emperors and other good king types is that they put their faith in the wrong person. They trust too much, and that allows people like Long Feng to run the place as a dictatorship until Team Avatar busts in and tell them what's what. In order for a benevolent emperor to exist within an evil empire at all, they usually have to be senile, a kid, or otherwise incompetent and unable to see what's actually going on. Now, you could write an interesting twist of having them pretend to be evil, playing the long game to avoid getting assassinated by their court while quietly rooting out corruption, but it would be hard to justify why an emperor, someone with built-in cheat codes, has to be sneaky at all when they could just arrest and execute the people that they suspect of usurping them. Overly Sarcastic Productions also mentions two female-specific variants of the evil emperors, hot and cold. Ice Queens are cold, ruthless, and emotionless. They'll sacrifice anyone and everyone to get what they want, torture, enslave, and they'll do it without a crisis of conscience or without really enjoying it either. It's just the job for them. Sometimes they're only that way to their enemies, but a lot warmer toward their inner circle. But a lot of them are cold all over, barely cracking a smile unless they're actively manipulating someone. Sometimes the Ice Queen is actually a good person, or at least a good ruler who doesn't actively harm her citizens. She's just kinda cold and distant, very calculating, probably a bit of a workaholic. But women with political power are usually written as villains just on principle because sexism. Hot empresses are more like temptresses. Think dominatrix with crown. Usually they happen because the writer has some repressed sexual fantasies that they need to try out in a safe environment. They will still fuck shit up, but they'll be a lot more gleeful about it than the cold Ice Queen. They'll torture the hero because it's fun, not because it's the quickest way to get information. They might also try to seduce him too, because why not? Not gonna lie, I kinda wanna see these two as sisters or wives, you know, co-empresses running the empire together. It'd be kind of fun to see them play off of each other's strengths and weaknesses. Now, I have a question for you guys. In the first video, I talked about two different types of evil empires. The ones that are pure evil, where every single person in that empire is evil and supportive of the overall evil plan, no exceptions, possibly due to magic. And then there are ones that are far more realistic, where the leadership is evil, but the rest of the are average citizens, with some supportive and others rebellious. My question for you is, what is the difference between that type of evil empire and a dystopia? The only differences that I can think of is that evil empires must be empires, they're in the name, they can't just be a singular country, and that evil empires can exist in a variety of different genres spanning fantasy and science fiction, while dystopias tend to happen in the near future or in an alternate history. But that's it. There's like 90% overlap. I don't know, it like just occurred to me last night while I was prettying up this script, so tell me what you think in the comments. Anyway, we have an emperor who might also be in a dystopia, so now we need a military. A powerful elite force that makes any protagonist shake in their boots. Mao Zedong, the intelligent dick, once said that political power flows from the barrel of a gun. What is less remembered is that he also said that the party must control the gun, but the gun must not control the party. Basically, whoever controls the violence has power. For an empire to work, that has to be the emperor. As soon as they give that power, that gun, to someone else, an advisor, a friend, a family member, they've lost control over the empire. Unless, of course, they have total control over that person. The military is how the emperor controls and defends their territory. Having an empire without one is just infeasible. And since you're writing an evil empire, your protagonists are probably going to run into these guys a few times trying to do the rebellion thing, so it is worth spending time thinking about how they operate and what type of technology and weapons they have. So the first thing you have to ask yourself is who makes up this military? Are they conscripted? Is there a law that states that all people or all men of a certain age must serve a certain amount of time in this military, or is it based on volunteers? That is going to affect how your military and empire treats its civilians, as well as how civilians treat their empire and view that, as well as the combat capacity of those civilians. In ancient Athens, militaries were made up of hoplites who had to provide their own weapons and armor, meaning they had to be financially well off. There was no such thing as a poor hoplite, really. But the training to use them was very easy, so these cities were able to whip up an army very quickly. This also means that they had a bunch of armed men in their city at all times, which is probably why the right to vote in Athens extended only to men who could afford to serve as a hoplite. A lot of evil empires have this thing where they rule with fear, and that's why they are in charge and everyone does as they say. That is their legitimacy, and of course the reason that they're able to rule with fear is because of their military. And their militaries are often made up of slaves or unwilling conscripts, but that's not sustainable. Slave armies don't work in the long run because you're forcing a bunch of people to risk their lives for people that they generally don't like and a cause they don't agree with. There is a reason that the Confederacy did not make their black slave soldiers, despite desperately needing the numbers by the end of the war. They knew that if they gave their slaves guns, those guns would very quickly be turned against them. People tend to serve in the military because they want to and/or they see no better options. At the end of the day, it's a job. I actually have an ancestor named Robert Cunningham who fought for the Massachusetts Cavalry in the American Civil War. Not because he was particularly patriotic, but because he was a poor Irish kid in Boston who needed the paycheck. And then he re-enlisted after his discharge in the middle of the war because they gave extra privileges and benefits for those who did. Your empire needs a massive, obedient, skilled military force. So how are they going to get people to enlist? Are they offering good pay, food, shelter? Are they leaning into nationalism, rewriting history to suit their narrative? Is there a cultural element that they've utilized, glorifying war and battle and service to the empire? These questions get compounded when you start looking into magic and technology. How common is magic and how does it work? How common are destructive sci-fi weapons? These are the elements that the empire, and specifically its military, are going to want to control. Imperial militaries usually fall into one of three categories: popular militia, professional standing military, and foreign mercenaries. Popular militia is the easiest and cheapest option. You get a bunch of local Joe Schmoes to get their own weapons and equipment, have local leaders train them, and boom, now you can invade or defend as needed. Once you've done what you need them to do, they go back to their everyday lives. This means that they do not put a strain on the treasury in the long-term training, upkeep, and equipment, so it's ideal for the empire on a budget. However, they are not particularly well trained, equipment can be shoddy, and most importantly, their loyalties do not lie with the emperor. Popular militias are, generally speaking, loyal to their families and local communities first, state, empire. So if you're doing an evil empire that's oppressing its civilians and causing a lot of suffering for everyday people, the popular militia is very likely to turn against the offenders. Standing armies fix a lot of the militia's defects, being better trained and equipped. They're also easier to politically indoctrinate and give that sweet, sweet nationalism, so they'll be far more likely to carry out orders that oppress the people and squish rebellions. However, this also makes them fantastically expensive and a threat to the emperor, because the general is the one that the men are loyal to. not necessarily the emperor. So if the general says, hey, I want to be emperor, back me up, those soldiers are likely to follow them instead of the crown. This is in fact a great way to show that your empire is failing by having several generals do this over a relatively short period of time. Happened to Rome. Honestly, I don't mean to throw shade, but after the first time, maybe don't give your generals so much power, Rome. Come on. Finally, foreign mercenaries are cheaper than standing armies, but they're equally trained and equipped. Theoretically, this also means that they're far more likely to be loyal to the emperor who is hiring them rather than anyone else. This was the idea in Rome when at least one emperor decided to hire a foreign mercenary to act as bodyguards. This did not work. Mercenaries are fickle. By definition, they follow the gold, so they're arguably even more likely to turn against the emperor than the standing army because anyone with a big enough check can convince them to do pretty much anything. Most empires have a combination of these three and utilize their strengths for a variety of problems, tasks, and situations. Of course, all of this is moot if the empire is broke, which is why commerce is such a big yet oddly underrated talking point. We touched on it with resources in the last video, which is one of the ways that the empire can get going, securing valuable resources or paths to those resources. Economics tends to be a pretty dry subject, I'll be the first to admit it. I hate it. I fell asleep during that class in high school, which is probably why most authors don't spend a lot of time here. But it is worth thinking, at least in broad terms, about where your empire's money comes from. Governments don't just have one form of income, especially not empires. The whole point of being an empire is to have your fingers in multiple pies, every single one that you can reach. What are the most valuable resources that it uses for trade, either internally or with other nations? If it does not control a particular resource, what does it have to sell to get it? Obviously, the citizens have to pay taxes, but how much are they? Nobody likes paying too much for taxes, so what are some ways that the empire can get money elsewhere without burdening their citizenry? Can they raid or invade other smaller countries? Do they encourage their vassal kingdoms to do it? How does your magic system or sci-fi technology play into all this? If an empire has a sinking economy, everything else is going to go downhill. If the treasury is constantly empty, forcing the empire to pull loans that it can't pay back, or taxing their citizens while they all starve, that's usually a sign of impending collapse, or at least a civil war. It's also worth noting how empires can use their economic power to control other countries outside of the empire. If the empire controls specific trade routes or has a monopoly on a specific resource like oil, spices, or magic glowing rocks, then it can charge more for people it doesn't like for whatever reason, and charge less to people that it does like. This can cause tension and resentment with foreign powers, which you can exploit in your novel. Finally, we have the administration. Nobody rules alone, especially not an emperor. They need multiple bureaucrats in every area of government on every level in order to make the empire run smoothly. The administration has three main jobs: collect taxes, which we already talked about, execute the ruler's commands and laws, and transmit information to the ruler. The administration is the bridge between the emperor and the citizenry. If the admins are giving bad info to the emperor or confused about the emperor's orders, that's going to cause some serious problems. Because it is so difficult for an emperor to actually go out into the world and see what their own empire is like for their citizens. Therefore, a lot of bureaucrats, historical and fictional, tend to be corrupt. They pocket the money, they give bad advice, they use the emperor's authority to do truly heinous things to his citizenry. This is where you get the scheme advisor trope, and sometimes the benevolent but ignorant emperor. As such, a smart emperor will keep a very close eye on their bureaucrats, maybe even set up a network of spies to keep an eye on them and make sure they're actually doing their jobs. Empires especially need the support of a group of people called notables. These are people like nobles, gentry, kings of conquered kingdoms, religious leaders, local councils, whatever the locals use as their form of leadership, often before the empire strolled in and took power. The notables are a part of the administration because they execute imperial laws within their own societies, and also translate the need of their societies to the emperor. Sometimes they even act as actual translators if the empire has a different language. But here's the key here: the notables are far more likely to be sympathetic and loyal to their own rather than to a distant emperor, which means in an evil empire, they could be valuable allies to your heroes. Or they could rule their own little corner of this empire like a petty tyrant, and the empire neither knows nor cares. Either one. Sometimes you get both in the same story, like the system of Westeros in Game of Thrones. The Lords of the Seven Kingdoms are each notables to the royal family, but even though their job is to serve whoever is on the Iron Throne, they're far more loyal to their own lands and people, with very different and distinct local customs, cultures, and ambitions. This is why characters like Sansa and, in his backstory, Theon were used as hostages, as a way to keep the peskier nobles in line. But outside of war and strife, marriages and wards produce the same effect, showing both trust in the Iron Throne and the notable's relatively more powerful place in that society. So those are the three ways that an empire maintains itself over the course of centuries: legitimacy, military, and administration. Once one of those legs starts to crumble, you're in trouble. The next video will be the last of this 4-part video series, and we will talk about how your heroes can defeat an evil empire. In the meantime, if you need more world building help, I've got an ultimate world building checklist available on my website, linked in the description. It is also available for free on Patreon, also linked in the description, and I am always available for one-on-one coaching. More info on my website. Guess what? That's linked in the description. I will see you next time. Bye, lovelies.